tonight we have, and we really have a wonderful team. I want to acknowledge we've got Jane Barrett and her husband Morton, Anna Robinson, a great team here. We always need help. It's quite a job to put these together, and so if you want to help in any capacity, just come and talk with us afterwards. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before I introduce tonight's speakers. And the first thing I want to let you all know is this program will not end at 9 o'clock or a few minutes after. We're going to do a brief intermission once the first two speakers conclude. Give the caterers an opportunity to clean up the last of the glasses and whatnot. And then after about a 10-minute intermission, and during that time, of course, those who need to get going home can do that, we're going to reconvene. So please plan on sticking around, and we will go late because we've got a lot to talk about. That's the first piece of housekeeping. So if you can stay late, please do so. We're going to have a big round circle discussion after the presentations. Second piece of housekeeping. Our final dinner for the spring, before we adjourn for the summer months of June, July, and August, will be on May 23rd, and the topic is Amazonia, a story of evolution. And Professor Lucia Garces Lohmann, a good friend, and visiting professor at UC Berkeley from South America, from Sao Paulo, Brazil, will be talking about the history and story of evolution of the Amazon rainforest over the course of 30 million years. And you'll see fascinating pictures and videos from riverboat tours up the Amazon and all kinds of amazing geological history, climate change, speciation, and extinction, which we'll also be talking about tonight. So May 23rd, please put it on your calendar, and we'll see you here for that. All right, end of housekeeping, and on to tonight's program. We have three main speakers tonight, after which we will have the roundtable discussion in which you all will be speakers. We'll be passing around the microphone and hearing from all of you, because what we're talking about tonight concerns all of us, all of humanity, and all of life on Earth. We'll start off with our lead speaker, Dr. Matthew Fox, who has had an incredible career. In fact, he could be described as a modern-day Teilhard de Chardin in terms of his breadth of knowledge, depth of, and his radical explorations and discoveries and incredible work. I'm not even going to try to go over his resume tonight, so Matthew, if you'd be good enough to give an introduction to yourself once I kick you off. But before that, sorry. That after Dr. Fox's presentation, we'll have a shorter presentation by Professor Guy McPherson, who I've gotten to know quite well over the last few years and has been here at the Sierra Club dinners a number of times before. A true hero and pioneer in his own right in getting the word out about this crisis that we're in, the planetary crisis. He'll be focusing on habitat for human animals and the threats that this habitat for all of humanity is under, and leading to a call to action. Then we're going to break, but just for a few minutes, and then we'll reconvene, at which point I will introduce Dr. Sailesh Rao, who is going to be talking about the story of Earth and humanity as a thermostat species, and how that thermostat species has done a great job for a few 100,000 years. He'll tell you how, but then we've overplayed our hand, and it's time for a radical transformation. So please strap in your seatbelts, get ready for an amazing evening, and after 9 o'clock, all of us will be participating in a round circle discussion. So for now, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Matthew Fox, who will talk about Christian spirituality and the encyclical of Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your vision in calling us all together, and Peter and everyone else who's made this evening possible. Thank you to everyone. And thank you to the waters out there. Beautiful picture to look at while we're talking about really important things. I'm reminded of a very renowned biologist at Stanford. I did a sweat lodge with several years ago, and I remember him telling me, he said, we're the first species in 4.5 billion years of the planet that can choose not to go extinct. Then he added, of course, we haven't made that choice yet. And I think that's what this 10-year warning from the United Nations study is all about. I think everyone today, no matter what our age, should meditate on 11 years from today and look back. What have we done? What could we have done to have made that shift more real, more profound, and more immediate? I think this is how every gathering of human beings should begin today, with a meditation on, I said 10 years, I think 13 years, 1 year after the deadline you've been given most recently. So I was asked to talk about Pope Francis's encyclical, Laudate Si, Care for Our Common Home. And I'm happy to do that. And then I'm talking half about that and half about a new movement that's sprung up in our bioregion here, the Order of the Sacred Earth. And one reason I have something to say about Pope Francis's encyclical is that it was written by one of my students, essentially. At Holy Names College, a few miles from here. I had my program in Career Spirituality for 12 years until the Vatican shut it down. They were trying to shut it down for 10 years, so we did a pretty good job of dancing. But they eventually shut it down. But before they shut it down, there was a fellow in our program who was an Irish missionary in the Philippines. And he got his master's with us in Career Spirituality, went back to the Philippines, started writing short books on spirituality and ecology. His name was Sean McDonough. And obviously Pope Francis read some of these books and plucked them up from the Philippines and took them to Rome and said, write this encyclical. So my story is this, that for 34 years under the previous two popes, I was called, quote, dangerous and deviant. Me and my work, dangerous and deviant. And now I have a pope who's plagiarizing my work. So I've lived the full circle of life, moving from dangerous and deviant to plagiarizing. I thought I would begin with a quote from Thomas Berry, because Sierra Books were smart enough to publish one of his important early works, The Dream of the Earth, right? Mm-hmm. Sierra Club published that. So there's a real link there. And of course, Thomas Berry is one of the great eco-prophets of our generation. This was in a foreword he wrote to a collection of meditations by Thomas Merton on nature. And he was asked to do the foreword. The title of the book is When the Trees Say Nothing. That's a line from one of Merton's poems. But here's what Thomas Berry said. Everywhere we find ourselves invaded by the world of the sacred. An absence of a sense of the sacred is a basic flaw in many of our efforts at ecologically or environmentally adjusting our human presence to the natural world. It has been said, we will not save what we do not love. We will not save what we do not love. It is also true that we will neither love nor save what we do not experience as sacred. Eventually, only our sense of the sacred will save us. So I think that's a pretty good kickoff for a reflection with you, both on the Pope's encyclical and on some movements happening today, many of which you people are involved in around saving the earth. What I find when I study the Pope's encyclical, and by the way, I want to, first of all, I'm glad that this encyclical is becoming common parlance for a lot of people. I know I ran into Brian Sim, the cosmologist, the other day, and he's just so ecstatic about the encyclical. He said, this is the best piece ever done on science and spirituality. And it is true that it's popping up. All kinds of Protestant churches are having discussions about this Pope's encyclical, and they should be, and all kinds of scientific groups are. I was invited to a group of 150 scientists on an island 2 summers ago, and they wanted to talk. They had me there to talk about the encyclical. Actually, I chose not to because there was so much despair in the group that I felt I should talk about despair. And I told them they can go to my website and see what it is about the encyclical. But one of Pope Francis's heroes is Pope John the 23rd. And John the 23rd wrote an encyclical on peace, which he addressed to all peoples of goodwill, not just for Catholics or Christians. And that is how, of course, Pope Francis begins his encyclical too. It's meant for all of us because, as was already mentioned, we're all citizens of the planet. As I wrote in my book on the Cosmic Christ 30 years ago, there's no such thing as a Roman Catholic rainforest, a Buddhist ocean, a Lutheran sun, and a Baptist moon. And when we reset the context of religion, we will realize it is the sacredness of creation underlying everything, and of the 13.8 billion years that have brought us here and made us possible and this amazing planet as it is possible. This is what underlies everything. All of our religions are but specks in this 13.8 billion year history, and indeed in the 14.5 billion year history of our planet. So what I find in going through the Pope's encyclical is a wonderful naming of the 4 paths of creation spirituality. The first path is the via positiva. That is what Barry's talking about when he says we're not going to save what we don't love. The via positiva is about falling in love. It is about waking up to the awe, what Rabbi Husha called the radical amazement of our existence itself, and of course of this planet that makes it all possible. And so this invitation to fall in love again, and again, our utter anthropocentrism has so shrunken this phrase, falling in love. We think falling in love is about finding a 2-legged mate until death do you part. I wish you luck with that. But it's not just about finding a 2-legged mate. You can fall in love with insects, and with stars, and with galaxies, and with forests, and with whales, and fishes, and animals, and soil, and trees, as well as poetry and music and beautiful things as humans get around to once in a while. Well, the point is, we're here to fall in love on a daily basis. That's where the energy comes from. And that's what is being challenged by our dancing, our tempting extinction, of course, at this time. That all these love affairs will be snuffed out, can be snuffed out for those who follow us. For example, in the encyclical, Pope Francis uses the word beauty 28 times. That is so stunningly a breakthrough for modern consciousness. Descartes has a whole philosophy with no philosophy of aesthetics. He throws out beauty. And theology since, modern theology, does not have beauty as a name for God, even though pre-modern theologians, Aquinas, Meister Eckhart, Francis of Assisi, all call God beauty. And of course, your Eastern Orthodox call God beauty. So Pope Francis picks up on that whole category, that the issue is about acknowledging the beauty, surrendering to the beauty, receiving again the sense of beauty. By the way, his encyclical, Fox News called Pope Francis, quote, the most dangerous man on the planet, unquote. What a compliment after the encyclical came out. And Rush Limbaugh said, clearly the Pope is a Marxist. And the Pope predicted that would happen. Here's just a few lines about the Via Positiva. Nature is a magnificent book in which God speaks to us and grants us a glimpse of the divine beauty and goodness. Now this tradition is alive and well in your pre-modern thinkers, Christian thinkers like Meister Eckhart and Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas said Revelation comes in 2 volumes, nature and the Bible. But modern religion in the West that's pretty much cut out nature, and it's all about this Bible book. And this is one reason Thomas Berry said we should put the Bible on the shelf for 15 years and rediscover the revelation of nature. Of course, if you're going to take nature seriously, that means you take scientists seriously, because that's their job. And Aquinas said a mistake about nature results in a mistake about God. So clearly, an insight about nature results in an insight about spirit and divinity. So again, the dialogue between science and spirituality is essential, not only for our survival, but even for a halfway decent understanding of theology and spirituality. Here's the Pope. Jesus invites others to be attentive to the beauty there is in the world, because he himself is in constant touch with nature, lending it an attention full of fondness and wonder. As he made his way through the land, he often stopped to contemplate the beauty sown by his Father, invite his disciples to perceive divine message in things. Lift up your eyes and see how the fields are already ripe for harvest, he said. So Pope Francis goes on and on about that important category of beauty and the joy and the goodness that comes from it. Now, one of the things that got me in trouble with the previous two papacies was my book called Original Blessing, which I don't apologize for. I think original sin is one of the most severe detours that religion has ever taken in the history of the world. Jews don't believe in original sin. They've never heard of original sin. Elie Wiesel says that the concept of original sin is alien to Jewish thinking. So Jesus was a Jew, and he never heard of original sin. The word came up in the 4th century from Augustine, the very century where the church inherited the empire. So for running an empire, original sin is a great idea. But for carrying on a message of healthy religion and spirituality, it is a complete detour. So it's interesting, and of course blessing is a theological word for goodness. So the Pope uses the word goodness about 21 times in this encyclical as well. He's calling us back to this consciousness of blessing. And the thing about blessing as goodness is that it's, and this has to do with the word sacred too. The sacred is something bigger than ourselves. Like the writer Sanders says, he says, I'm interested not in what I make, but in what's made me. And that's what nature is. Nature has made us. 13.8 billion years have made us, has made this planet. And that's what it means to step out of our narcissism, Pope Francis's word, as a species, into the context, again, of the sacred. And it is that goodness that has preceded us. The fine-tuning of the oxygen by the flowers, for example, that happened 100 million years before we came here, you know, that was a setup for us. It's goodness. It was a blessing. The whole story of the universe can be seen that way and ought to be seen that way. And again, it fills us with wonder. So those are just a few examples of the Via Positiva in this encyclical, but it's riddled with it, and for very good reason. To get back to the goodness of our existence. And to begin religion with sin is so banal, and it's so anthropocentric. Only humans sin. So why would you want to leave out every other species and every other billion years to jump into your own guilt first? Rabbi Heschel makes a point, really explicit. He says Judaism does not begin with humanity's evil or sin. It begins with the goodness of being here. Check out Genesis 1. It is good, it is good, it is good, it is very good. Christians just took a scissors to that page and jumped into chapter 2, Adam and Eve. Oh, come on. Okay, next in a great spiritual journey is the Via Negativa. The Via Negativa is about two things. It's about silence. It's about stillness. Be still and learn that I am God, as the Jewish scriptures say. It's that mind emptying that precedes the mindfulness. So it is about meditation, it's about calming the reptilian brain and getting in touch with silence. Meister Eckhart says, nothing in all creation is so like God as silence. And of course, awe, which is at the heart of the Via Positiva, awe produces silence. There's that wonderful story about Job after all his trials, and then God says, were you there, Job, when I created the boundaries of the earth and the boundaries of the waters, and I taught mountain goats how to make love and have babies and all? Where were you, Job? And when it says Job put his hand over his mouth, he shut up, because that's what awe makes us do. And the wonderful stories from today's cosmology are absolutely fire for awe. But that also means awe leads us to silence and to reverence. And that is the tasting and the implementing of the sacred. The sacred is an experience. Gary Schneider, the Buddhist poet, defines the sacred as the wild, and the wild as the sacred. And we all have wildness. The wild is not just up in Yosemite. We all have a wildness in us, including our passion for justice, and our moral outrage at injustice, and what we are on the path we're currently on that is leaving so much damage to future generations. So the Via Negativa is on the one hand about entertaining silence and being emptied, but it's also about suffering and grief. And in this part of the encyclical, Pope Francis was very influenced by my friend Leonardo Boff, the liberation theologian from Brazil. Because when he and I were on a program together a few years ago in Monterrey, Mexico, he told me he was writing part of the Pope's encyclical. And what he gave a talk on that day was exactly this chapter, if you will, this section of the encyclical, and that is how the suffering of Mother Earth today is absolutely parallel to the suffering of the poor. That Mother Earth is being treated the way we have treated the poor for centuries. Ignoring, exploiting, exploitative capitalism, taking and not giving back, and so forth. And that's a big part of the Pope's encyclical here. That the poor are on the front lines of the destruction of the planet. They already are the ones who are abandoning villages in the Pacific Islands and so forth because they're no longer sustainable, because the salt water is overwhelming the fresh water, etc. They are on the front lines in this struggle as well. But Pope Francis makes a very smart connection between we're treating Mother Earth the way we treat the poor. And so this revolution in awareness and consciousness and survival is also a revolution on how we're treating one another. It's a wake-up call across the line, across the board. And the third path in the creation tradition is the Via Creativa. It's about creativity. Once you've done this emptying, and once you've tasted grief and tasted the ashes and meditated on it, or done what Joanna Macy has done with her friend John Seed, creating a ritual remembering the species that are going extinct and the species that will be going extinct, chanting that and praying that, putting it into our bones and our bodies and our molecules and imaginations. Once you do that kind of grieving, then you're ready for creativity. It's like Meister Eckhart says. He says, once I had a dream, even though a man, I dreamt I was pregnant with nothingness. And out of this nothingness, God was born. And so all creativity comes from the empty womb. And this emptiness we all have to taste and undergo. And that is how new spirit, new life comes forward then. That's creativity. Creativity isn't just about shuffling things around. It is about radical new beginnings. And that's the path of creativity. It's the path, in theological language, of the Holy Spirit at work. The Spirit makes all things new. the spirit that hovered over the waters at the beginning of creation, or in our story today, hovered over the fireball at the beginning of creation. Burst the universe and keeps birthing it, keeps it going that way. And but the same spirit is working through us. Thomas Aquinas says, the same spirit that hovered over the waters at the beginning of creation hovers over the mind of the artist at work. So that's really significant. It's the same spirit of creativity that is calling us today to new forms of education, new forms of agriculture, new forms of economics, new forms of politics, and new forms of religion. And that's the Via Creativa. And Pope Francis talks about the Holy Spirit possesses an infinite creativity. Human creativity cannot be suppressed, he says, but is meant to be of service to others. A form of power, an admirable creativity. We have to do everything to stimulate creativity in our institutions and to combat those who want to stifle creativity, etc. We need an ecological conversion, he says, that can inspire us to greater creativity and enthusiasm resolving the world's problems. Then the fourth path is the Via Transformativa. The Transformativa is about compassion and justice. It gives us the direction for our creativity. Because obviously creativity can go to the way of destruction or the way of healing. The gas ovens in Nazi times were creative. So are nuclear weapons and the submarines to deliver them, etc., etc., etc. And so creativity needs a direction. And the direction is that of justice, it is that of compassion, and of course it is that of 7 generations from today. What will they be inheriting from our works of creativity or lack thereof? And let me stress that we are all artists. David Paladin, I hope some of you know his work, a Navajo painter, an amazing guy with an amazing story. But near the end of his life, he said this. He said, I'm so sick and tired of white people telling me they're not creative. They're not artists. He said, if you could talk, you're an artist. So get over it. If you could translate your thoughts, your passions, your feelings and experience into language, you are an artist. So this whole modern idea, it's a modern idea, it's not a pre-modern idea. It's a modern idea. There are only some people are artists, we put them up on pedestals, and if you're a capitalist, you invest in them. That's not what art or being an artist is. We're all co-creators. And therefore, we're all responsible to give birth to all these new forms that we're talking about. Put our creativity to work. He says that, Pope Francis says that economic powers continue to justify the current global system where priority tends to be given to speculation and the pursuit of financial gain, which fail to take the context into account, let alone the effects on human dignity and the natural environment. We are being continually distracted, constantly, to dull our consciousness of just how limited and finite our world really is. The market is in fact an idol, a deified market, a deified market. She's invoking some very ancient language there about idolatry to name the current economic system that is running things and despoiling both the planet and our own souls. Now when it comes to hope, I love the definition from David Orr, the eco philosopher. Hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up. And that's why the 4 paths of creation spirituality, they certainly culminate in action. What are the actions, what are the movements that we can create today? Just as gathering tonight is bringing together various sources, from science to spirituality and politics and art and all the rest. That's the kind of thing we have to ask about. So now I want to switch gears a little bit to this new movement I'm a part of called the Order of the Sacred Earth. We put out this book about 6 months ago, subtitled An Intergenerational Vision of Love and Action. I wrote this book and launched this order with two young people who are here today, Jen Listy, why don't you stand, and Skylar Wilson. They are a couple. And they are the directors of this movement because I think the young today have to lead. And we elders have a very important role to support them and to connect them to other elders and other groups, such as this evening's gathering. And I hope you all meet Skylar and Jen. But they are wonderful young people who feel very called to make a difference in the world today. So what is this order thing? Well, when I look at the history of religion, I notice that religion often goes into a dark time, into the basement kind of. But in the West, an order usually pops up. So in the 3rd century, when religion was beginning to flirt with the empire, these young men and women went out to the desert. We know them as the desert fathers and desert mothers, but they didn't have long beards at the time. They were young when they fled what they felt was toxic, valueless culture to live a more authentic life in the spirit of how they understood Jesus. Then in the 5th, 6th century, after the church had married the empire, Benedict and his sister Scholastica started the Benedictine monastic movement. And that did a lot of good for a culture for many centuries. It sustained agriculture and learning and so forth and so forth. But it too went sour in the 12th century. It got too fat, too lazy, too married to the feudal system. It lost its critical faculties. It got literally fat and lazy. And so there was this corruption in religion, and popped up Francis of Assisi and Dominic in the late 12th century, early 13th century. And they created a whole new movement, a whole new orders, a Franciscan order, the Dominican order. And the Dominican order birthed people like Aquinas and Meister Eckhart, even Mechtilde Megaberg, and she was a Beguine, but she was very affiliated with the Dominicans. And then, of course, the 16th century, we had the corruption in Rome, and one response was the Protestant Reformation. And I see the Protestant reformers as really like creating new orders. So you could see the Lutheran Church, the Calvin Church, the other Protestant could be understood as lay orders. Each one had their own charismatic founder with their own theology, their own ritual, and so forth. Right, now we move up, and then of course you had Ignatius founding the Jesuit order, staying within the Catholic Church, but responding to the same issue, which was the corruption in the Vatican, in the Rome at the time. Then we're here now in the 21st century. And what I look around and what do I see? I see a lot of people, young people leaving religion, but I don't see something offering much community in response. And that's where the idea of the order of the Sacred Earth comes out. It's not a religious order, because you have to study the shadow side of history too and realize that Francis of Assisi, he did not want any of his brothers to become priests, because he knew if you became a priest, you'd be entering that hierarchical thing, and horrible things can happen when you climb that ladder. But what they did, his order became so successful, they took it away from him. He died 2 years later. I think he died of a broken heart. Within one generation, the Franciscans were running the Inquisition. And so were the Dominicans. So that's what happens when a spiritual movement connects to, marries too closely a religious institution. So this order is not a religious order. We're beyond that today. It's a spiritual order, meaning it's open to anyone from any tradition or none who wants to take one common vow. I promise to be the best lover of Mother Earth and the best defender of Mother Earth that I can be. That's the one vow. That's the glue. And you can come from any lifestyle or any spiritual tradition. But this is what binds us together, taking that vow. And we do it in bioregions. You create your own group, which we call a pod, and you treat each other like adults. You gather and you say, well, what does this vow mean to me, to my context, to my bioregion, to us? How do we do it? How do we put it into practice? So that's what's happening. And there are about 45 of these pods now around North America. and I'm heading for Australia and New Zealand pretty soon, and I think we'll get some groups going there too, and about 1,500 people. But I think it's a marvelous alternative, like orders always are. Religions they're like a big ship. They take forever to turn. But an order pops up out of a need. And that's what's exciting, I think, about an order today. And when we had our first vow-taking ceremony, it was here in Berkeley at the Spring Center, Buddhist Center, and the solstice a winter ago. And 80 people showed up. And there were indigenous people, there were goddess people, there were Hindus and Buddhists and Christians and Jews, and at least one atheist. A 28-year-old woman came up to me and said, I'm an atheist, but I'm looking for a community that shares my values. I read about this, I'm in. I want to be in. So that's, I think, the kind of porous communities that we can call forth today. And to bring your wisdom, that's where you want the diversity. I want the wisdom of Hinduism. I want the wisdom of Buddhism. I want the wisdom of atheism. I want the wisdom of Judaism and Christianity and the goddess and the rest. Why wouldn't we want to bring, this is all hands on deck moment in human and planetary history. Why wouldn't we want to bring all the wisdom and address it with this focus? And a 26-year-old woman said this to me. She said, you know, my generation is so dispersed. We're so busy with social media. We're all over the place. We need a focus. That's why this idea of an order, taking a vow, really speaks to me. She said, my generation needs a focus. And that's exactly what a vow does. And of course, our generation, this moment in history, we need this focus. You know, nothing else matters if we don't have healthy water, healthy soil, healthy air, healthy forests, and healthy animals full of spirit and revelation to nurture us spiritually. So I invite you to take a look at this, to talk to Jennifer and Skylar during the break. But think about joining the Order of the Sacred Earth. Now, in this book, the first half is the three of us talking, and each of us with an essay. The second half is short essays, 2 or 3 pages by other people. And I'd like to just end by sharing with you one paragraph from the cosmologist Brian Swimme, who's one of the people who responded to this book for us. Because I think it speaks to the yearning for community today, and of course from a scientific perspective. He says, an individual hydrogen atom that cannot transform itself into carbon, nitrogen, or phosphorus. An individual hydrogen atom will persist as it is without change for billions of years. At the most, it might disintegrate into an electron and a proton. It will never create anything new by itself. But the amazing fact is that if a hydrogen atom finds itself in the intense and interactive community called a star, it discovers that it has the power to participate in crucial ways in its transformation into the elements that give birth to life. In the community called a star, an individual atom becomes a gateway into the next era of the universe's story. This process whereby the universe constructs commitment that ignite the creativity of its members, as in the Order of the Sacred Earth, has been going on for 14 billion years. And I expect this new intensity to happen within the Order of the Sacred Earth. So I think he's painted an amazing picture of what community means to hydrogen atoms, that star, how the energy, how everything changes. The star becomes creative. So this is possible, I think, with community today. And it's not about having to live together under one roof, although there's nothing wrong with that. But with the internet and other ways today, there are so many ways of staying in touch and making community happen with this goal. And we forget the word community, communio, means sharing a common task together. It doesn't mean sitting around holding hands. It means to share a task. Well, what is the task today? Obvious. The task is the theme of this gathering tonight. The task is, how are we going to save this planet, and how are we going to put off our extinction? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fox. Absolutely inspiring, brilliant. And let's answer the call. Let's honor the call of Dr. Matthew Fox and join in community in this task in front of us.